My grandfather had been dead for less than a day, and I had already broken the one rule he'd lived his life by. The one rule my father had lived by and his father before him. For generations, my family has guarded a plain wooden box. The rule was simple. You don't talk about it, you don't move it, and you never, ever open it. But last night, standing alone in the quiet house that was now mine, the silence felt different. It felt like a dare. The box sat on the mantelpiece, a dark spot in the dim room, and the curiosity that had been a small itch my whole life became a roaring fire. I had to know, so I opened it. Inside, there was no old book, no weapon, nothing I could have imagined. There was only dust. A fine, black dust that swirled in a slow, lazy circle, as if stirred by a breath of air I couldn't feel. A coldness radiated from it, a deep, biting cold that touched my fingers and seemed to crawl up my arms, making the hairs stand on end. The dust didn't settle. It just kept moving, a tiny, silent storm in a box. I watched the swirling dust for what felt like an hour, mesmerized and deeply disappointed. All those years of secrecy, of silent, anxious guardianship. For this? A box of weird dust? The cold emanating from it was unsettling, but I tried to rationalize it. Some kind of chemical reaction, maybe. Static electricity. There had to be a logical explanation. The feeling of transgression, however, was very real. It sat like a stone in my stomach. I had betrayed my grandfather, my father, the entire line of my family, for a box of dirt. Finally, I put the lid back on. It clicked shut with the same quiet finality as before. I lifted the box, which felt just as heavy and cold as ever, and placed it back on the mantelpiece. I told myself I would forget about it. I would pretend it never happened. I would continue the watch, just like them, only I would carry the hollow knowledge of what I was actually guarding. It was a pointless, absurd duty, and now it was mine. I went to bed that night feeling like a fool. The image of the swirling black dust burned into the back of my eyelids. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the grimy windows and the house felt a little less oppressive. I made coffee, the familiar ritual, small comfort in the echoing quiet. As I sat at the kitchen table, my eyes landed on a small, silver-framed photograph on the side table. It was my favorite picture of Sarah, taken on our first anniversary. We were at the beach, and the wind was catching her hair. She was laughing, her head thrown back, her eyes full of a light that I missed more than air. There was a film on the glass, a faint, dark layer of grime. I picked it up, my thumb moving to wipe it clean, but as I touched it, a jolt of recognition went through me. It was the dust, the same fine, black, shimmering dust from the box. A small, perfect thumbprint of it was now smeared across Sarah's smiling face. A chill that had nothing to do with the morning air crept over my skin. How? The box was closed. It was in the other room. I looked around, searching for any other trace of it. The house was dusty, yes, but this was different. This dust felt intentional. I wiped the rest of it from the glass, my hand shaking slightly. It was a coincidence. It had to be. Dust from the mantelpiece must have gotten onto my fingers when I moved the box. I must have touched the photo without realizing it. That was the only explanation. But as I put the photo back down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the silence of the house had a new and menacing quality to it. The dust on the photo felt less like a coincidence and more like a claim. That night, I tried to lose myself in a book, sitting in my grandfather's worn leather armchair. The house settled around me, making its usual noises. The groan of the pipes, the hum of the old refrigerator, the sigh of the wind against the window panes. These were familiar sounds, the sounds of my childhood. But then, a new sound threaded its way through the quiet. It was a whisper. It was so faint at first that I thought I'd imagined it, a trick of the wind or my own tired mind. I put the book down, my body tensing, and listened. The house was silent again, except for the steady ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. I picked my book back up, my heart beating a little faster than before. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the guilt of opening the box was making me jumpy. Then I heard it again. This time it was clearer, a soft, sibilant sound like the rustle of dry leaves, but there were no trees near the window. It was a murmur, too low to be words, but it had the cadence of speech. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, from the corners of the room, from the hallway, from the air itself. I got up, my book falling to the floor, forgotten. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and thin in the large room. The only answer was the echo of my own voice. I walked through the downstairs rooms, my footsteps loud on the wooden floors. I checked the locks on the doors, the latches on the windows. Everything was secure. The sound was inside with me. I went back to the living room and stood there listening. The whispering continued, a constant, unintelligible stream of sound. It was like listening to a radio tuned between stations, the ghosts of voices rising and falling without ever forming a coherent thought. It was maddening. I covered my ears, but it didn't help. The sound wasn't just in the air, it felt like it was inside my head, a faint vibration at the base of my skull. I spent the rest of the night with the lights on, jumping at every creak and groan of the old house. The whispers would fade and then return, never loud enough to be a real voice, but never quiet enough to be ignored. It was a kind of torture, a slow erosion of my sanity. I knew with a certainty that defied all logic that the whispers had started after I opened the box. The dust was not just dust, and the box was not just a box. I had not uncovered a secret. I had unleashed one. The following days were a blur of anxiety and self-doubt. The whispers were a constant, faint companion, a maddening background noise to my every waking moment. I started to feel like I was living in a house that was actively trying to unnerve me. And then, things started to move. It began with small, easily dismissible things. I'd leave my car keys on the hook by the door, a habit of a lifetime. But when I went to leave, they'd be sitting in the middle of the kitchen table. I'd make a cup of coffee and set it on the coaster on the end table. I'd turn to grab the newspaper, and when I turned back, the mug would be on the floor by the armchair, the coffee cold. At first, I blamed myself. Grief, I thought. Stress. I was becoming forgetful, absent-minded. It was the only rational explanation. I started making a conscious effort to pay attention, to note where I was putting things. I placed my wallet on the dresser in my bedroom, saying the words aloud, "My wallet is on the dresser." I'd go to take a shower, and when I came out, the wallet would be on the nightstand. The feeling of losing my mind was terrifying. I started to question my own perceptions, my own memory. Did I really put the book back on the shelf, or did I just think I did? But the incidents became more frequent, more blatant. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen making a sandwich. I took the jar of mustard out of the refrigerator, placed it on the counter, and turned to get a knife from the drawer. In the 2 seconds my back was turned, the jar moved. It was now sitting on the far edge of the counter right next to the sink. I had not touched it. I had not heard a sound. It had simply shifted. I stared at the jar, my blood running cold. This wasn't forgetfulness. This wasn't a tired mind playing tricks. Something was happening. The house felt charged, alive with a malevolent energy. The air was thick with it. I felt like a guest in my own home, an intruder in a space that was no longer mine. The final straw came a few days later. I had been reading my grandfather's journal, trying to find some clue, any explanation for what was happening. I had left the journal open on the armchair when I went to bed. The next morning, it was gone. I searched the living room, my panic growing with every passing second. I looked under the cushions, behind the furniture, everywhere. It was nowhere. I spent the entire day tearing the house apart, my search growing more and more frantic. Finally, exhausted and defeated, I collapsed onto the sofa. As my head tilted back, my eyes scanned the top of the tall, dusty bookcase against the far wall, a bookcase I hadn't touched in years. There it was. The journal was sitting on the very top shelf, nestled between 2 thick, leather-bound books, as if it had been there forever. There was no way I could have put it there. I would have needed a stepladder. A cold dread washed over me. Whatever was in this house with me was not just moving things. It was playing with me. It was showing me that it could go anywhere, touch anything. It was showing me that I had no control. With my heart pounding, I dragged a chair over to the bookcase and climbed up to retrieve the journal. My hands were trembling as I took it down. It felt different now, not just a book, but a relic, a key to the madness that had enveloped my life. I sat down, the open book in my lap, and forced myself to read from the beginning, to absorb every word my grandfather had written. The first half of the journal was mundane, almost painfully so. It was filled with the quiet observations of an old man. "Mildred's roses are in full bloom," he wrote. "Best they've looked in years." There were notes about the weather, complaints about his arthritis, and detailed accounts of his fishing trips. It was the diary of a man living a quiet, simple life. It was the man I remembered. This section made the second half all the more terrifying. The shift in tone was jarring. It began with a single chilling entry dated 10 years ago. "The duty feels heavier tonight," he wrote. "The house is cold. The silence is different. It is listening." From that point on, the entries became more sporadic, more focused. He never named the box, always referring to it as the duty, the anchor, or our silent companion. He wrote about the importance of the watch, the absolute necessity of never leaving the house empty for more than a day. "It sleeps," one entry read, the handwriting a little shaky. "It is a deep, dreamless sleep. But it is not death. As long as the house is its home, and the home is sealed by our presence, It sleeps. We are not its jailers. We are its guardians. We do not keep it in. We keep it from waking. My blood ran cold. Waking? The word seemed to leap off the page. This wasn't a passive object. It was a dormant thing, a thing that could wake up. He wrote about the whispers, describing them exactly as I had experienced them, faint, directionless, like voices carried on the wind. He wrote about things moving, a mischief in the quiet, as he called it. He, too, had questioned his sanity, had wondered if grief and loneliness were making him see things. But his entries grew more certain, more afraid. "It is a parasite of the mind," he wrote a few years later, the ink blotched as if his hand was shaking. "It feeds on attention. To fear it is to feed it. To acknowledge it is to strengthen it. The duty is not just to watch, but to ignore, to live alongside it, as if it is nothing more than a piece of furniture. That is the only way to keep it quiet." I felt a wave of nausea. I had done the opposite. I had focused all of my attention on it. I had feared it. I had obsessed over it. And I had opened it. I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning for any mention of what would happen if the box was opened. I found it near the end, on a page where the writing was a desperate, almost illegible scrawl. "God forgive me, I almost opened it today," he wrote. "The loneliness is a cancer." I wanted to see. I wanted to know. But I remembered my father's words. The box is not a prison. It does not contain the thing. The box is its anchor, its focus. To open it is not to release a prisoner. It is to invite a guest. It is to open the door and say, "I see you. Come in." I dropped the journal as if it were on fire. The words echoed in the silent room, a death sentence. I hadn't released it. I had invited it in. The knowledge from the journal changed everything. I was no longer just a man grieving in a creepy old house. I was a man who had willingly invited a malevolent entity into his life. The whispers seemed to have a new quality now, a mocking, triumphant edge. The moving objects felt less like pranks and more like a slow, deliberate claiming of the space around me. I was exhausted, living on a knife's edge of fear, sleeping in short, fitful bursts, and waking up with my heart pounding. One evening, I was in the upstairs bathroom, the one my grandfather had used. The mirror was old and spotted, the silvering flaking away at the edges. I stared at my reflection, at the dark circles under my eyes, the pale, drawn skin. I looked like a ghost. I leaned over the sink and splashed cold water on my face, the shock of it a welcome distraction. I did it again, letting the water run through my hair and down my neck. When I looked up again, my eyes dripping, my reflection was wrong. For a split second, a single, heart-stopping beat. The face in the mirror was not my own. It was me, but it was not me. My own face was frozen in a mask of tired shock. But the reflection, it smiled. It was a wide, slow, predatory smile, a smile of pure malice that did not reach its eyes. The eyes of the reflection were flat and black, devoid of any light or emotion. It was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. I stumbled backward, crashing against the bathroom door, my breath catching in my throat. I couldn't scream. The sound was trapped in my chest. I stared at the mirror, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. My reflection was normal again. It was just me, my own terrified face looking back at me, water dripping from my chin onto my shirt. "No," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "No, no, no." I approached the mirror slowly, cautiously, as if it were a wild animal. I leaned in close, my breath fogging the glass. My reflection mimicked my every move. I raised a shaking hand. It raised its hand. I forced a smile. It forced a smile. It was just me. It had to be. It was a trick of the light, a trick of the water in my eyes, a trick of a mind stretched to its breaking point. It had to be, but I knew it wasn't. I had seen it. I had seen the cold alien intelligence looking out at me from behind my own eyes. It wasn't just in the house with me anymore. It was trying to get inside me. The journal had said it was a parasite of the mind. I had thought that was a metaphor. Now, I was afraid it was literal. I fled the bathroom, leaving the light on, and refused to look at another reflective surface for the rest of the night. I didn't want to see that smile ever again. The dust was no longer just a memory from the box or a strange film on a photograph. It was becoming a physical presence in the house. In the corner of the living room, directly below the spot on the mantelpiece where the box sat, a small pile of the fine black dust had appeared. The first time I saw it, I assumed it was just an accumulation of normal household dust, a sign of my neglect. I got the dustpan and brush and tried to sweep it up, but it was like trying to sweep smoke. Bristles of the brush passed right through it, disturbing it into a brief, swirling cloud before it settled back into the exact same spot, the exact same shape. It wouldn't move. It had a strange weight to it, a substance that defied my attempts to clean it. Over the next few days, the pile grew. It was a slow, almost imperceptible process. Every morning it seemed a little larger, a little darker. It wasn't spreading out like normal dust, it was growing upwards, accumulating into a small, dense mound. It had a faint, unnatural shimmer to it, and it swirled constantly, a dark, silent vortex in the corner of my eye. The air around it was cold, the same biting cold that had come from the box. I started to avoid that corner of the room altogether. I would walk around it, giving it a wide berth, as if it were a sleeping animal I was afraid to wake. But I couldn't stop watching it. It drew my eye, a patch of wrongness in the familiar landscape of the living room. It seemed to be gathering itself, pulling itself together from the very air in the house. Was this what was inside the box? Was it reforming itself out here in my home? One afternoon I gathered my courage and approached it. I knelt down, my face close to the swirling pile. It didn't look like dust anymore. It looked like iron filings, but it moved with the fluidity of liquid. It was building something, a base, a foundation. As I watched, a wisp of the dust lifted from the pile and drifted through the air, a single dark tendril before dissolving back into nothing. I scrambled back, a fresh wave of terror washing over me. This wasn't just a pile of inert matter, it was active, it was growing, it was a manifestation of the thing that was haunting me, a physical anchor for it in the world. The box on the mantelpiece was its source, and this pile of dust in the corner was its new body, and I had no idea how to stop it. The whispers were changing. They were no longer just faint rustling sounds at the edge of my hearing. They were becoming clearer, bolder. They were finding ways to use the house itself to speak to me. The house was full of old electronics, my grandfather's ancient television, a large boxy thing from the 90s, and a refrigerator that hummed and rattled constantly. These were the sounds of my childhood. Now they were becoming conduits for the entity. One evening, I couldn't stand the silence anymore and turned on the television. I flipped through the channels, finding nothing but static and dead air on most of them. I settled on an old black and white movie, the sound tinny and distant. During a quiet moment in the film, a voice cut through the dialogue. It was a low, rumbling voice, my grandfather's voice. It said my name, Liam. I froze, the remote control slipping from my hand. The actors on the screen continued their scene, oblivious. The voice had come from the television speaker, but it was not part of the movie. It was clear, present, and it was in the room with me. I turned the television off, my heart pounding. The screen went black, but the voice lingered in the air. Don't be afraid, Liam. After that, I started hearing it everywhere. The low, constant hum of the refrigerator would suddenly resolve into a single, clear word. Hungry, it seemed to buzz. The rushing sound of the water in the pipes when I took a shower would twist into a high, thin whisper that sounded like my mother's voice, humming the lullaby she used to sing to me when I was a child. It was a cruel and calculated torture. It was using the voices of the people I had loved and lost, twisting my memories into weapons against me. It was a constant, invasive presence, a violation of the most sacred parts of my mind. I couldn't escape it. If I sat in silence, I heard the faint whispers in the air. If I tried to drown them out with noise, the entity would use that noise to speak to me more clearly. The worst was my father's voice. He had been a hard man, a man I had always tried and failed to please. The entity used his voice to whisper all of my deepest insecurities. "You're a failure, Liam," it would say, the voice seeming to come from the static of the unplugged radio on the desk. "You couldn't even keep your wife safe, and now you can't keep your own house safe." The words were poison. They seeped into my mind, reinforcing the guilt and the grief that were already eating me alive. The entity wasn't just haunting my house, it was haunting me, using my own memories and fears as its tools. It was deconstructing me, piece by piece, and I was letting it happen. I retreated back to the journal, the only source of information I had. I read it for hours, sitting in the armchair, the swirling pile of dust in the corner of my eye, the whispers a constant hum in the background. I wasn't just reading for clues anymore. I was reading for survival. I forced myself to study my grandfather's words, to understand the nature of the thing I was facing. His later entries were filled with a frantic, desperate energy. The neat, careful script of his early years was gone, replaced by a spidery, slanted scrawl that was difficult to read. He wrote about the entity's hunger. "It is drawn to life, to energy, to emotion," he wrote. "It is a creature of pure want. It has no body, no voice of its own. It must borrow. It must steal. For centuries it has been content to sip at the edges of our lives, to feed on the echoes we leave behind, but it is growing stronger, or perhaps we are growing weaker." He described the duty of the guardian in terrifying detail. It was a constant battle of wills, a psychological war fought in the silence of the house. The guardian had to starve the entity, deny it the emotional energy it craved. He had to live a life of quiet control, of emotional discipline. He had to treat the box as if it were nothing more than a piece of furniture. That is the only way to keep it quiet. To acknowledge it is to feed it, he repeated, the words underlined 3 times. To fear is to make it strong. To love, to hate, to grieve, these are feasts for it. It twists them. It uses them. It turns our own hearts against us. I felt a profound sense of failure. I had done everything wrong. I had feared it. I had obsessed over it. I had grieved openly in its presence. I had fed it a banquet of my own emotional turmoil. And then I had opened the door. I found the passage I had read before, the one that had filled me with such dread, and read it again. The box is not its prison. The box is its anchor, a focus for its energy in this world. To open it is not to release a prisoner. It is to invite the guest. It is to say, I see you. I acknowledge you. Come in. It is the ultimate act of feeding. It is an offering of the self. My breath hitched, an offering of the self. I hadn't just opened a box. I had performed a ritual without knowing it. I had given the entity permission to enter my life, my home, my mind. The final entries in the journal were almost incoherent, a stream of consciousness filled with terror and regret. He wrote about the shadow, the man of dust. He wrote about its voice, how it could mimic the dead. He wrote about its desire to be whole, to be real. It wants a body, he wrote on the last coherent page. It is tired of the shadows. It wants to walk in the sun. It wants to live. It needs a host. It needs a door to be opened, not just into the house, but into a mind. It needs a will that is weak enough, a heart that is broken enough to let it in. I closed the journal, the leather cover cool against my trembling hands. My will was weak. My heart was broken. I was the perfect host. The pile of dust in the corner was no longer just a pile. It had begun to take on a form. It was a slow, horrifying transformation, like watching a statue being sculpted by an invisible hand. The dust had risen from the floor, coalescing into a tall, thin shape that stood in the corner of the room. It was vaguely human, with a suggestion of a head, a torso, 2 long, thin arms. It was a 3-dimensional shadow. It had no face, no features, no details. It was a void, a patch of darkness that seemed to absorb the light around it. When I looked directly at it, my eyes would slide off, unable to focus. It was like looking at a blind spot, a hole in reality that had taken up residence in my living room. It was there, and it was not there, a paradox of physics and fear. And it was growing more solid, more defined, with every passing day. I stopped using the living room after dark. I would eat in the kitchen and then go straight upstairs to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. But I couldn't escape it. I could feel its presence from the floor below, a cold spot in the heart of the house. I could feel it watching me, its unseen gaze following me as I moved through the rooms above. One afternoon, driven by a morbid need to confront the thing, I stood in the doorway of the living room and just watched it. The shape was almost as tall as me now. The dust that composed it was in constant, slow motion, a roiling, silent storm that gave the figure a horrifying semblance of life. It was not breathing, but it seemed to expand and contract, to shift its weight from one unseen foot to the other. As I watched, one of its long, thin arms lifted slowly, the dust particles swirling as it moved. It reached out not towards me, but towards the wall, its fingers, little more than tendrils of swirling dust, brushing against the faded wallpaper. Where it touched, the wallpaper seemed to darken, to decay, the floral pattern turning a sickly, necrotic brown. It was draining the life, the color, from the very house itself. I felt a new kind of fear then, a fear that went beyond the whispers and the moving objects. This was not just a ghost, this was a predator. It was a thing of decay, of entropy. It was a cancer in my home, and it was growing stronger, more real, while everything around it, including me, began to fade. The man of dust, my grandfather had called it. And now it was here, a silent, faceless statue of dread in the corner of my life. I had started sleeping in the armchair in my bedroom, unable to bear the vulnerability of lying in a bed. I would doze off for an hour or 2 at a time, the journal clutched in my lap like a talisman. The nights were the worst. The house was at its most active, the whispers at their clearest. I was in a constant state of sleep-deprived, high-strung terror. One night, I drifted off into a deeper sleep than usual. I was dreaming of Sarah. We were in a field of tall grass, the sun warm on our faces. She was laughing, her voice clear and beautiful. It was a good dream, a memory of a better time. But then, the sun went out. The warmth vanished, replaced by a biting cold. The field of grass turned to black dust. Sarah's face began to crumble, to dissolve into swirling particles. I woke with a gasp, my body rigid. The room was dark, but I was not alone. A feeling of intense, unnatural cold was pressed against my forehead. I opened my eyes, and my dream terror became a waking nightmare. The dust figure was standing over me. It was no longer confined to the living room. It was here, in my bedroom, by my chair. Its form was clearer than ever before, the edges more defined. It looked like a tall, emaciated man made of roiling black smoke. It was leaning over me, its faceless head tilted as if in curiosity, and from the end of one of its long, thin arms, a single dusty finger was extended, touching my skin right between my eyes. The cold was paralyzing. It wasn't just a lack of heat, it was an active, invasive cold that seemed to be sinking directly into my skull. I tried to scream, but my throat was frozen. I tried to move, to pull away, but my limbs were heavy, useless, as if they were made of lead. I could only lie there, my eyes wide with terror, my breath trapped in my lungs as the shadow looked down at me. Its touch was not violent. It was exploratory. It felt like it was reading me. The cold spread from my forehead down into my chest, a spiderweb of ice creeping through my veins. I felt a strange, dizzying sensation, a feeling of being hollowed out. Memories, thoughts, fears, all the things that made me muck, felt like they were being drawn out, siphoned away by that single point of contact. I was a fly in a spider's web, and the spider was tasting me. The paralysis, the silence, the invasive cold, it was the most profound violation I had ever experienced. After what felt like an eternity, the figure slowly withdrew its hand. The cold receded, and the ability to move returned to my limbs in a rush of painful pins and needles. I scrambled out of the chair, falling to the floor, and crab-walked backward until I hit the wall. The dust figure stood there for a moment longer, a silent black monolith in the darkness, and then it simply dissolved, its particles dispersing into the air until nothing was left. I was alone again, but the feeling of its touch, the icy brand on my forehead, remained. After the night it touched me, the entity grew bolder. It was as if it had tasted me and now knew me. The whispers in the house began to coalesce, to form a single, coherent voice. It chose to use my grandfather's voice, a deep, rumbling baritone that had once been a source of comfort and was now a tool of terror. It didn't shout. It spoke in a calm, conversational tone that was far more unnerving. The voice would come from the darkest corner of the room, from an empty chair, from right behind my shoulder. "I'm so glad you let me out, Liam," it said one evening, its voice seeming to emanate from the fireplace. I was huddled on the sofa, a blanket pulled up to my chin. "It's been so long, so quiet. I missed having company." I didn't answer. The journal had warned me not to acknowledge it, not to feed it. I squeezed my eyes shut and tried to block it out. "Oh, you can ignore me if you like," the voice continued, a hint of amusement in its tone. "But I'm here. You opened the door. You invited me in. That was very polite of you. Your grandfather was never so polite. The voice was my grandfather's, but the personality behind it was alien. It was arrogant, cruel, and ancient. It was a predator playing with its food. He was strong," the entity mused, its voice now seeming to come from the ceiling above me. "They were all strong, your ancestors. For centuries they starved me. They lived quiet, boring lives. They locked their hearts away. They gave me nothing, just scraps, echoes. But you, Liam, you are different. Your heart is not locked away. It is broken, it is wide open, and it is full of such delicious pain." I flinched as if struck. It knew about the guilt I carried over Sarah's death, the car accident I had survived and she had not. It knew about the grief that was a constant open wound in my soul. "Such a feast," the voice whispered, now directly in my ear. I shot up from the sofa, spinning around to find nothing there. All that guilt, all that sorrow, it makes you so very strong and so very weak. I have not fed like this in centuries. Thank you. The voice was no longer just a haunting, it was a conversation. A one-sided, terrifying conversation, but a conversation nonetheless. It was trying to break me down, to make me respond, to engage with it. It wanted me to give in to the fear, to the despair. It wanted me to give up. And with every passing day, with every taunting word spoken in my grandfather's voice, I felt my resolve crumbling. The house itself was becoming my prison. It was no longer a passive backdrop for the haunting, it was an active participant. The entity was not just in the house, it was becoming the house, twisting its very architecture into a maze of psychological torture. Doors became a particular source of terror. I would walk into a room and the door would slam shut behind me, the lock clicking with a loud, definitive snap. I would be trapped for an hour, sometimes two, pounding on the solid wood, shouting until my voice was hoarse, only for the lock to suddenly click open on its own, releasing me back into the silent, waiting house. Hallways were worse. One morning, I was walking from my bedroom to the kitchen. It was a short hallway, maybe 20 feet long, but as I walked, it seemed to stretch. The door to the kitchen at the far end didn't get any closer. I started walking faster, then running, my heart pounding in my chest. The patterned runner on the floor seemed to be spooling out from under the kitchen door, the walls on either side of me stretching into an impossible, terrifying distance. I was running as hard as I could, but I was getting nowhere. I finally collapsed, gasping for breath, and when I looked up, the hallway was its normal size again. I was just a few feet from the kitchen door. The most unsettling change was in the family portraits that lined the main staircase. They were old, black and white photographs of my ancestors, stern-faced men and women with dark, serious eyes. They had always been a little creepy. Now they were terrifying. Their faces were changing. It was subtle at first. A mouth that seemed to be turned down in a frown one day would be stretched into a subtle sneer the next. But the real horror was in their eyes. The eyes in the photographs were becoming dark, hollow pits. They looked like the eyes of skulls, empty and black, and they followed me. As I walked up the stairs, I could feel their collective gaze on me, a silent, dead-eyed judgment from the generations of guardians I had failed. The house was no longer my home. It was a weapon being used against me. It was a funhouse of horrors designed to break my mind. Every corner held a potential new terror. Every familiar object could be twisted into something monstrous. I was living in a constant state of siege, trapped inside the belly of the beast, and the beast was the house itself. The entity had been tormenting me for weeks, wearing me down, isolating me, turning my world into a nightmare. I was a wreck, a ghost in my own life. One night, as I sat shivering in the kitchen, the only room that felt remotely safe, it finally decided to tell me what it wanted. It didn't use my grandfather's voice this time. It used mine. "We should talk," it said. The voice was a perfect copy of my own, coming from the empty chair across the small kitchen table. It was like listening to a recording of myself. I didn't look up. I just stared at the patterns in the wooden tabletop. "You're wondering what I am," my own voice continued, calm and reasonable. "You're wondering what I want? It's only fair that I tell you. After all, we're going to be spending a lot of time together." A cold dread, sharp and clean, cut through the fog of my exhaustion. "I am a shadow," it said, "a parasite, a consciousness without a body. My kind has always existed, clinging to the edges of your world, to the bloodlines that are strong enough to sustain us. Your family has been my family for a very, very long time. We have a partnership. They provide a home, an anchor, and I am the silent companion. I feed on the echoes, the emotions, the memories they leave behind. It's a small price to pay for the protection of the watch." It paused, as if waiting for me to respond. I remained silent, my hands clenched into fists under the table. "But it is a lonely existence," my voice continued, a note of something like self-pity creeping in. "To be a shadow, to be an echo, to taste life only second-hand. Over the centuries I have grown strong on the grief and fear of your ancestors, and I have grown tired of the shadows." The entity leaned forward, and though there was nothing there, I could feel the shift in its presence, the intensity of its focus on me. "Then you came along, Liam," it said, my name sounding alien in my own voice. So full of life, so full of pain, a broken heart, a guilty conscience. You are a feast, but more than that, you are a door. Your grandfather, your father, their wills were like iron. I could not touch them. But you are different. You are strong enough to be more than an anchor. You are strong enough to be a vessel." I finally looked up, my eyes meeting the empty space where the voice was coming from. "What do you want?" I whispered, my voice a dry rasp. The voice smiled. I could hear it in the tone. "I want what you have, Liam. I want your hands. I want your feet. I want your feet. I want your face. I want to wear your skin and walk in the sun. I want to live. I will consume you, your memories, your personality, everything that is you. And I will take your place. You will be a passenger in your own body, a silent observer, a prisoner in your own mind, and I will finally be whole." The truth was more horrifying than anything I could have imagined. It didn't want to kill me. It wanted to become me. The entity's confession shattered the last of my denial. This was not a haunting I could survive by waiting it out. This was a battle for my own soul. Hope, a feeling I hadn't experienced in weeks, flickered faintly within me. It was a desperate, terrified hope, but it was there. It was fueled by the one thing I had left, my grandfather's journal. I fled to my bedroom, locking the door, and tore through the final pages of the journal, my eyes scanning the frantic, spidery script. He had been terrified, but he had not been without a plan. He had been preparing for a fight he hoped he would never have to have, and on the very last page, tucked away after a long, rambling prayer, I found it. It was a section titled, "In Case of a Breach." It was a ritual of containment, a way to force the entity back into the box. The instructions were terrifyingly simple and impossibly difficult. My grandfather wrote that the entity, for all its power, had a weakness, its hunger. It was drawn to strong, pure, emotional energy like a moth to a flame. It could not resist a powerful memory, a moment of profound, unadulterated human feeling. That was the bait. "You must find a memory that burns bright," he wrote, his handwriting shaking with the intensity of the thought. "A memory of pure joy, of love, of a moment when you felt truly, completely alive. It must be a memory that defines you. You must hold it in your mind, every detail, every sensation. You must offer it, willingly. It will be drawn to it. It will not be able to resist the feast." The instructions continued. "When it comes to feed, when it is focused entirely on the memory, that is the moment of its weakness. Its essence will be drawn out of the house, out of the shadows, and into the memory itself. You must bring the memory, and therefore the entity, to the box. And when it is consumed by its feeding, you must close the door. You must seal it back in its anchor." I read the passage again and again, my mind reeling. The cost was stated in the final chilling sentence of the journal. "Be warned," he wrote, "the memory you offer will not be a copy. It will be the memory itself. It will be consumed. It will be gone forever. You will be sacrificing a piece of your own soul to save the rest of it. Choose wisely. A piece of my soul." I sat there, the journal open in my lap, the entity's whispers beginning to seep through the locked door. I had to give it a memory. I had to sacrifice a part of myself to this thing. The question was, what part? What memory was strong enough, and what part of myself was I willing to lose forever? I spent the next day in a state of quiet, focused dread. I had to choose a memory. I sifted through my past, through the moments that had defined me, my childhood, my graduation, my first job. None of them felt strong enough. They were pale, faded things compared to the vibrant, ravenous darkness that was stalking my house. The entity fed on emotion. I had to give it the strongest emotion I had ever felt. There was only one choice. It was the memory I held most sacred, the one I would retreat to in my darkest moments. It was the memory of the day I met Sarah. To choose it felt like a betrayal. It felt like a desecration, but its power was undeniable. It was a perfect sunlit afternoon in late spring. I had been sitting on a park bench reading a book, trying to escape the city noise, and then I heard a laugh. It was a bright, clear, musical sound that cut through everything else. I looked up, and there she was. She was trying to untangle a kite string from the branches of a cherry tree, her face a mixture of frustration and amusement. The sun caught the red highlights in her hair. She was wearing a simple yellow dress. I could remember the pattern of the fabric, the way the breeze lifted the hem. I could remember the smell of the cherry blossoms and the freshly cut grass. I had gotten up to help her, and we had spent the next hour working together, our hands brushing, our laughter mingling with the sounds of the park. When we finally freed the kite, she had turned to me, her eyes the color of warm honey, and had given me a smile that rearranged my entire world. In that moment, I had felt a sense of rightness, of coming home, that I had never felt before. It was the beginning of everything. It was the happiest I had ever been, and I had to give it to the monster in my house. I spent hours reliving it, strengthening it, polishing every detail until it shone in my mind. I brought up the warmth of the sun on my skin, the rough texture of the kite string, the exact shade of her lipstick. I focused on the feeling, the overwhelming, heart-stopping wave of love and hope that had washed over me. I had to make it irresistible. I was baiting a trap for a god or a demon, and the bait was the most beautiful moment of my life. The pain of the decision was a physical thing, a tight, cold knot in my chest. But as I prepared to sacrifice my past, I was also preparing to fight for my future. That night, I did not hide. I walked down the stairs and into the living room, the heart of the entity's power. The dust figure was waiting in the corner, a tall black silhouette against the darkened windows. The air was frigid, the whispers a cacophony of taunts and threats. I ignored them. I walked to the mantelpiece and took down the box. It was cold, so cold it burned my hands. I placed it on the heavy oak table, just as I had on that first fateful night. With a trembling hand, I pressed the release. The lid sighed open, revealing the empty, dark interior. The anchor was ready. "I have something for you," I said, my voice loud and clear in the silent room. The dust figure turned its faceless head towards me. The whispers stopped. The house went completely still. I could feel the entity's attention, its ancient, hungry consciousness, focused entirely on me. I closed my eyes and brought forth the memory. The living room dissolved. I was back in the park. The sun was warm, the grass was green, the cherry blossoms were a fragrant cloud around me. Sarah was there, laughing, her face full of life. I let the memory wash over me. I let the love, the pure, undiluted joy of that moment fill me completely. I held it out, not as a memory, but as a reality, an offering. I could feel the entity's reaction. It was a wave of pure, ravenous desire. The cold in the room intensified, but it was a hungry cold now. The shadow thing began to move, drifting from its corner towards me and the table. It was no longer a solid shape, but a flowing, amorphous cloud of black dust, a river of darkness drawn to the light of my memory. It reached out a tendril of dust, not to me, but to the scene in my mind. As it touched the edge of the memory, I felt a searing pain, a psychic tearing. It was a sense of loss so profound it almost broke my concentration. The entity was drinking my memory. The edges of the sunlit park began to fray, to turn gray and crumble. Sarah's laughter began to distort, to echo and fade. The entity was lost in its feeding. It was completely focused, completely vulnerable. Its entire essence was being poured into the act of consumption. And as it fed, its physical form, the cloud of dust, was being pulled, stretched, drawn like smoke into the dark, open mouth of the box on the table. I held on, fighting against the pain and the loss, keeping the memory alive just long enough. The entity was a torrent of darkness now, flowing from the corners of the room, from the walls, from the air itself, all of it pouring into the box. The sound was a high-pitched psychic scream of mingled pleasure and rage. The last image in my mind was Sarah's smiling face dissolving into dust. Then it was gone. The memory was a black, empty void. With the last of my strength, I lunged forward and slammed the lid of the box shut. The click of the lock was the loudest sound I had ever heard. The silence that followed was absolute. It was not the heavy, listening silence of before. It was a true, empty silence. The whispers were gone. The oppressive cold was gone. The feeling of being watched, a feeling that had been my constant companion for weeks, had vanished. It was over. I stood there for a long time, my hands flat on the lid of the box, my body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. The living room was just a room again. The shadows were just shadows. I had done it. I had won. But the victory felt hollow. I felt empty. There was a gaping hole in my mind, a space where something important used to be. I knew intellectually what I had sacrificed, but the feeling was gone. The warmth, the love, the joy of that memory were gone, replaced by a cold, sterile knowledge of facts. I stumbled through the house, checking the rooms. The portraits on the stairs looked like normal, stern-faced ancestors again. The hallway was just a hallway. The house felt like my own again. But I did not feel like myself. I went into the kitchen and saw the silver-framed photograph on the side table. I picked it up. It was a picture of a woman with kind, smiling eyes and reddish-brown hair. She was beautiful. The back of the frame had a small inscription, L&S, Anniversary 1, S. Sarah. That was her name. She was my wife. I stared at her face, waiting for the familiar pang of grief, the wave of love, the warmth of memory. Nothing came. I felt a profound and terrifying disconnect. I was looking at the face of a stranger. I knew who she was supposed to be. I knew the story of our life together, the facts of it, like a list of dates and events, but the emotional truth of it, the part that mattered, had been scooped out of me. The entity had not just eaten a memory, it had eaten the foundation of my love for her. It had taken the moment I met her, the moment everything began, and had left the void in its place. I had saved myself, but I had lost the best part of me. The price of survival was a piece of my own soul, just as my grandfather had warned. The house is quiet now. The days pass in a calm, orderly succession. The sun comes up, the sun goes down. The silence is no longer a threat. It is simply an absence of sound. I have cleaned the house from top to bottom. I have repaired the decaying wallpaper. It is my home again. The box sits on the mantelpiece. It is just a box now, a dark, heavy piece of wood. It radiates no cold. It whispers no secrets. It is dormant, sleeping. But I know what is inside. I am the guardian now. The duty is mine, and I understand it in a way my ancestors never could. The duty is not just to keep the box closed. It is to remember the price of opening it. I survived. I am free. But the freedom is a cold, empty thing. I go through the motions of life. I eat. I sleep. I read. But the world seems to have lost its color. The edges of everything are a little less sharp. The volume of life has been turned down. Sometimes I pick up the photograph of the woman named Sarah. I look at her smiling face, a face I know I am supposed to love, a face that should fill me with a warmth that could chase away the deepest chill. I trace the outline of her cheek with my finger. I say her name out loud. But I feel nothing, no love, no grief, no joy, no pain, just a cold, hollow space where a beautiful memory used to be. I know her name. I know she was my wife, but I cannot remember why she was important to me. I look at the face of a stranger, a beautiful stranger I am tied to by a history I can no longer feel. And all I feel is the silence, the quiet, empty, endless silence, and the weight of the box waiting on the mantelpiece, waiting for the next guardian, waiting for the next broken heart.